Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and today, in the silly season between Thanksgiving and New Year's, I'd like to share with you my 2017 Gear of the Year awards and finish with my second annual Elephant Award for the best example of image making from multiple angles as a way of understanding the totality of what we're actually seeing. So, grab a hot cocoa or whatever libation suits you, have a seat and put your feet up, and enjoy. Or, if you want to cut straight to the chase, just click on the Show More button below this video, and you'll see all of the picks listed neatly for you, along with no cost to you affiliate links, for which I will thank you now in advance for using to support our work. Thank you. So, now, as before, you may find my categories atypical or missing certain things altogether, but hey, we don't have the bandwidth nor interest, honestly, in looking at every category out there, and I'll only talk about those things with which I've had hands-on experience. So with those caveats, let's get straight into it, beginning with cameras. First up, my overall winner for Camera of the Year, the Panasonic GH5. Now, many of you may already know this, as I named the GH5 Camera of the Year back at the beginning of August, but I stand by that call today, even after the release of extraordinary cameras like the Nikon D850 and the Sony A7R III and the GFX50 actually shipping. Now, I plunked down $2,000 of my own hard cash for one of the first GH5s to ship, along with another $1,500 worth of glass, because I knew 2017 was going to be the year I started a major documentary project. I would need or want most of its video capabilities and operational characteristics, from class-leading in-body image stabilization to unlimited recording lengths. Certainly all of the exposure and focus assists, the ports, including full-size HDMI and USB-C, yay! That brilliant 3.7 million dot EVF, the high-capacity battery, beautiful 120 frames per second in full HD, and maybe that 10-bit 422 all-intra in-camera recording. I also wanted a darned good stills camera with really good ergonomics and excellent AF, and the GH5 delivers both of these as a stills camera. Yeah, sure, there are other cameras that have better low-light performance, higher burst rates, more resolution, or much better autofocus in video, and the Fuji X-T2 talks to me in a way that the GH5 does not. But in the world in which I live and show my work, the GH5 is an unbeatable hybrid camera at an unbeatable price. The best of the best, and for that, it's simply not the best hybrid camera of the year, but to me, the best camera overall. Of course, then you have the Sony A7R III, which, if not for its still relatively fiddly ergonomics, incompletely developed touch interface, and frame rates, it's missing intervalometer functionality, for example, and 60 frames per second in 4K, the 30-minute and 8-bit 4K recording limits, the more limited IBIS, and dramatically higher price, you could argue smokes the GH5. And I'd have to agree, to the extent, to be very clear, it's about that sensor. But I wouldn't stop there. And that's why the A7R III has proven to be a controversial winner, one that I am comfortable with nonetheless, one that I think if you watch the entire segment I did on it, you just might agree. And that is the Sony A7R III as medium format camera of the year. This is because with its improved ergonomics and shutter, the same EVF and battery, nearly the same autofocus, and dual card slots from the A9, the same brilliant 42 plus megapixel sensor from its predecessor, the A7R II, and finally, a lens ecosystem which is now well-rounded and truly superb, the A7R III, on the facts and to my eyes of its sensor and top-end lens performance, sits squarely in the realm of medium-format cameras like the Hassi X1D and H6D50C, the Fuji GFX50S, and Pentax 645Z, and smokes them for value in video, if, again, not menus and handling, nor ultimate stills image quality, if you insist on a 100-megapixel sensor and 16-bit RAW. Which leaves the A7R III either too expensive or a steal, depending on your point of view. That's because at $3,200 for the body and another $11,000 or so for a complete, if not exhaustive, collection of glass, you need to want to shoot fast and wide open most of the time, display really big, and have very deep pockets for this camera to make sense. Unless you're coming from medium format, in which case it's a steal. It's only because I know that this last sentence does not describe me, that the gear I already have and use is superb. I don't want the weight of all that glass, and there are other ways I want to spend, or save actually my money, that I haven't ordered one. That plus repeated doses at regular intervals of gas X. So let's move on. Here's an easy one. My winner of the 2017 Bridge Camera of the Year, yet another Sony, the RX10 Mark IV. Now, the 4 is yet again one of those cameras which, depending on your point of view, is either way too expensive or really cheap. Taking all of the goodness of the RX10 Mark III, like the ergos that I think are actually better than Sony's APS-C and full-frame cameras. The deceptively excellent f2.4-4 built-in Zeiss lens with a 24 to 600 millimeter full-frame equivalent field of view, and adding phase detect autofocus plus 24 frames per second burst rate, which is faster, let me remind you, than the A9. The RX10 Mark IV is a monstrously accomplished package of technologies which punches way above the 1-inch sensor and $1,700 price tag with which it is spec'd. If you wanted one travel camera to do it all, this could well be it. The only places where it will struggle are when you want very shallow depth of field, insist upon shooting fast action sports under less than ideal lighting conditions, or want to record for more than 30 minutes or in 10-bit. It doesn't struggle, it just can't do it. But for most people, this is not a very constraining set of limitations, and you really can't beat its all-in-one functionality. Now, 3 months ago, the Panasonic FZ2500 might have given me pause because of its lower price and internal ND, but not now. The RX10 Mark IV is the king of this particular hill. Next up, Panasonic's G9, winner of my 2017 most intriguing camera of the year. Now, I have one on loan. I've only just begun to explore it, but I really like it, really like it, which surprises me, candidly. It feels great in the hand. The EVF is even better than the one in the GH5 because now it has 0.83x image magnification. And the magnification can be stepped back to allow a full view of the screen, even for eyeglass wearers like myself. That magnification exceeds the spec and the view, which I now know personally, of the Sony A9 and A7R III. The 20 frames per second burst rate matches that of the Sony A9, which extraordinarily in my book, as if one needed any further confirmation, Panasonic is clearly targeting, especially when mated to the also announced image-stabilized 200mm f2.8. The G9 has a certain crispness in its handling that the GH5 lacks, though, hey, I didn't know it lacked it until I picked up the G9. More refined ergos, better, one full stop better in-body image stabilization and autofocus, along with a price tag which at $1,700 is $300 less than the GH5. More on the autofocus and everything else in an upcoming review. No, the G9 doesn't do 10-bit 4K recording like the GH5. 4K and 1080 are both 8-bit. It doesn't offer unlimited recording either. It does not, which I found out to my great surprise in the middle of a documentary shoot, work with the excellent XLR mic adapter unit, although this is perhaps less surprising than it should have been since Panasonic stresses this is a stills-oriented camera. But it will still do 60 frames per second in 4K and 180 frames per second in Full HD. Again, stay tuned for more on these as well. And while the 20.3 megapixel sensor, which it carries over from the GH5, is excellent and better than most people realize, many folks will dismiss it because it's micro four thirds, which is too bad because for most people that sensor is more than they will ever need, stills or video, and the entire package is outstanding. And I will tell you that in my early testing, the refinements Panasonic tells us it has made show. Early stills I've taken just pop. I give Panasonic a lot of credit and respect for investing in an entirely new body and new lens so soon after the launch of the GH5, with the explicit positioning that most real photographers, even professional photographers in the real world, don't need more. Especially because I agree with them. Now let's turn to the winner of this year's most inspiring camera for a stills shooter, the Fuji X-T2. I get to use and play with my fair share of cameras, but it is only the X-T2 to which I formed an emotional attachment. It is the camera for which I fell hard because of its ergonomics, specifically those top plate dials, viewfinder, and lenses, specifically the brilliant 56mm f2, 1.2 and the 16mm f1.4. This is a 24 megapixel APS-C system using essentially the same sensor found in Sony's a6300 and a6500, put into a body and given a lens system which are uncompromised nor deprioritized in deference to a full-frame sibling. And it shows. Those lenses are as good as any I've ever used. Super tasty, compact, beautifully made, and well-priced. Some even have hard stops at the end of the focus rotation. They're just gorgeous. And useful for astrophotography, as I learned the hard way out in Sedona. The photography-centric, no doubt photographer design controls are simply unmatched in the industry. The menu system is much easier to navigate than that of the Sonys, though it doesn't have the touch interface of the panties. And I love, love, love the elegance and nod to the filmic past of its simulations of storied Fuji emulsions like acros. The X-T2's autofocus is phase detect and works very well, though not as well as the A7R III, nor as cinematically as the GH5 in video, when the GH5 video AF actually works. More on the X-T2's video. It is excellent 8-bit, very much a match again to the A6300 and A6500, but like them, the recording is limited. Shorter without the optional battery grip, longer but still shorter than the Sonys with it, and you'll need that grip to get a headphone jack too. But video is not why you buy this camera. I'd sum up the X-T2 system this way. If you have a loved one, a husband, wife, lover, partner, yourself, who is a photographer thinking of moving from Canon or Nikon or any other full-frame or even medium format system to something smaller, buy them this camera with those two lenses, and your relationship is all but guaranteed to last another decade. Well, you know what I mean. Next, winner of the most overhyped but underrated camera of the year, Apple's iPhone X. Look, I hate animojis. I hate them. They're stupid, even if I appreciate the tech that enables them. And all the hand-wringing over the notch, the cost of wireless charging, the almost bezel-less screen, the absence of a home button, leave me somewhere between nonplussed and cranky. But what the X has that no other iPhone does is image stabilization on both lenses. And for the one camera that you have on you all the time, this is a big deal. And the camera is, in fact, already, to my eye, noticeably better than the 7 Plus I replaced, which is saying something. The way I look at it, you're talking the difference of a few $100s for that functionality compared to the 8 Plus, and while that same few $100s could go to, for example, water filters for the entirely too many people still laboring in Puerto Rico without running water, or any other charity of your choice, I'd say, if you're in the market for a new smartphone and you're a photographer or videographer, donate that money anyway, and then get the iPhone X. You'll be glad you did on multiple levels. Let's talk about the ones that got away. A three-way tie for winners of the category I'll call the cameras I wanted to go hands-on with but didn't get the chance. The Nikon D850, Fujifilm GFX 50S, and the Leica CL. Sometimes one draws conclusions based on factors other than first-hand experience, and it can be okay. You don't need to test drive a Bentley, for example, to know it's too expensive for you. most of the time, a Lamborghini to know it's more speed than you'll ever need, or a Yugo to know you just meh. All you need to do is study. But sometimes you know it would be fun to do it anyway, or you might actually surprise yourself and learn something you hadn't anticipated. Or you're committed to understanding at a deep level the totality of an industry, and in this example, these three cars represent very different corners of the industry which you typically wouldn't visit on your own, yet they better help you understand the trade-offs available to all at this point in time. Which is not to imply that the D850 is a bit like the Bentley, the GFX50S, a bit like the Lambo, or the CL even remotely like a Yugo. Seriously, I'm not saying that. But each of these cameras does appeal deeply to a certain audience other than me, maybe you, and there is something to be said for taking the time to truly understand why that is so. In fact, each of these particular cameras appeals to me in a certain way that no other cameras this year have. The D850 is the first Nikon since the F-Photomic I've wanted to hold in my hands, even if I already know I don't need 47.5 megapixels, it doesn't have the video capabilities I want, and I'm done with optical viewfinders. The CL is the first Leica I've wanted to hold in my hand since my M8, and before that the 3A, even if I already know it's too expensive and too limited to be my sole or even secondary hybrid camera. The Fuji GFX50 is the first medium format camera I've wanted to hold in my hands since the Contax 645. Even if I already know its price and lack of sufficient video functionality take it out of the running for my bread and butter work. But I still want to spend time with each of them. We will see if we can make that happen in 2018. Now, let's turn to lenses, but let's divvy those up by the formats with which I've had a sufficient hands-on experience to comment: full frame, APS-C, and micro four thirds. I'll start with micro four thirds because that's what I've been shooting the most with this year. And I'll begin with the Panasonic Leica 15mm f1.7 Summilux, which I'm naming wide standard micro four thirds lens of the year. What I really wanted was a full frame equivalent field of view of a 24mm, but the 15 Summilux is so diminutive, fast, well constructed, sharp, contrasty, and affordable at just about $550 that I've learned to love this 30mm full frame equivalent. I use it a lot, especially for street photography, where I often pair it with one of Panasonic's black and white Acros-esque picture styles. I don't understand why I have to unscrew a ring at the front of the lens that I will doubtless lose just to attach to the lens hood, but other than that, the 15mm 1.7 is a home run. The worthy alternative is, of course, the Leica 12mm f1.4. It does have the wider field of view I prefer and a faster maximum aperture. Because it's Panasonic, it can take advantage of depth from deep focus. But at $1,300, being much larger and having more chromatic aberration, it wasn't and isn't compelling enough for me to get yet. Next, winner of my micro four thirds standard lens of the year, the Sigma 30mm f1.4. I decided to buy the Sigma because I knew I'd be doing a lot of one-shots. It's fantastic sharpness, excellent control of chromatic aberration, and bargain price, $340. It is the one lens I rely on more than the rest combined for our documentary work and for vlogging, and it is fantastic. The $600 Summilux 25mm f1.4 is a worthy alternative, giving up price and chromatic aberration while offering again the ability to use DFD. In fact, if I'd better understood then what I do know about DFD and transition focus, I might have gone with the Summilux. I really do need to get one back in for further testing. Next, my 2017 winner of micro four thirds medium telephoto lens of the year, the Olympus 75mm f1.8. At the full frame equivalent of a 150mm f3.6, It sure doesn't sound like a brilliant portrait lens, but I'm here to tell you that the Ollie 75 is just optically and mechanically superb, giving up in some cases less than an inch of shallow depth of field when you actually do the math at the distances I typically shoot portraiture. If you don't believe me, check it out for yourself using the excellent PCAM app available in the iTunes App Store, setting it for about 5 feet. It isn't image stabilized, but the IBIS and the GH5 and now the G9 are so good that it truly does not matter. DFD is something else. Finally, in the Micro Four Thirds category, winner of my 2017 MFT Long Telephoto Lens of the Year is, as you've probably already guessed, the Panasonic Leica 200mm f2.8 with 1.4x teleconverter. Now, I only had my hands on a pre-production unit for a few minutes, but the view through the Panasonic G9 viewfinder, as I looked out the window of Pani's U.S. headquarters toward Manhattan, was brilliantly crisp, even with the teleconverter. At 3K, it's an expensive lens for any format, let alone Micro Four Thirds. And as a single focal length prime, you can't really zoom with your feet. But with this said, offering a full frame equivalent field of view of a 400mm all the way up to a 560mm in a package 1/2 the size and 1/3 the weight of a typical full frame 400mm 2.8, I have more than a sneaking suspicion the 200mm 2.8 with image stabilization is going to be a breakout product for the company in 2018, just like the G9. Let's turn to full frame lenses, because this year I'm surprised by my own choices. Last year it was one lens across all formats, and it was Sony's 85mm f1.4 G Master. But my full frame lens choices this year surprised me because most of them are not G Masters. First up, Sony's just announced 24-105 f4, winner of my 2017 full frame standard zoom of the year. I haven't put it up side by side with any other lens, but I remember my emotional reaction to just about every lens I've ever used, and then often have occasion to go back and look at the images I captured with them. Using the Sony 24-105 in Sedona shocked me and delighted Claudia. This lens is going to cost me money, and here's why. 1. It felt at least as sharp and contrasty as my standard zoom for many years, the Canon 28-72.8L, and not less sharp than the outstanding Sony G Master 24-72.8 I shot with extensively down in Miami last year. 2. The f4 maximum aperture doesn't bother me the way it once did. I've altered my workflow over the past 2 years so that I don't worry about 2.8 zooms, relying instead on swapping to even faster primes when I need shallower depth of field, or else using distance and longer focal lengths on the zoom to compensate. 3. This focal range really allows me to get by with a single lens most of the time, rather than having to worry or lug around the 24-70 and 70-200 on the 42 plus megapixel Sony A7 R2s and 3s. I can crop the heck out of an image to get what I need in a pinch, as I did in Manhattan during the A7 R3 launch shoot, or even use the clear image zoom, although it's different in video. 4. The 24-105 is image stabilized, while the 24-70 is not. And while the A7 R2 and 3 have in-body stabilization, I don't actually know how the two systems interact. I like having this choice so I can also use it on our A6300, which does not. Now, at $1,300, this is not an inexpensive lens, but it is about half the price of the really wonderful 28-135 f4, and for that amount of money, I'm willing to forego the PZ's brilliant ergonomics. Next, my 2017 full-frame wide-angle lens of the year, the Sony Zeiss 35mm 1.4 Distagon. First, what can I say? I'm a sucker for fast primes, but as I've said elsewhere, this is the first 35mm lens I've actually liked enough to covet. Until now, I'd been happy to move directly from 50 to 24, not pass and go, not collecting 200, not using 35mm. But this Distagon, even with its chromatic aberration, slayed me in Sedona and stayed attached to the A7R3 for something like 80% of the time. Negatives beyond the chromatic aberration? Well, 2. Price at $1,500 a copy, and size. This sucker is huge. On the other hand, it's half the price of the $3,200 Leica Summicron 35f2 aspherical I reluctantly sold when I sold my crop sensor M8, though that Summicron was a jewel, where the Distagon is a brute. I think this is one of the reasons I'd like to get my hands on a CL. Time for a little more Gas X. Next, my winner of 2017 full-frame telephoto zoom lens of the year, Sony's 100 to 400 millimeter f4.5 to 5.6. I mean, it's been a heck of a year for Sony. They're playing catch-up, they're just about caught up, and they're going at what remains with a vengeance. I spent time with the 100 to 400 in New York City and again in Sedona, and it is definitely worthy of the G-Master moniker. It really, by comparison, sits well above the Micro Four Thirds Panasonic Leica 100 to 400 in optical performance, build quality, and operation. And while they are not the same fields of view or reach, the Leica is the one lens closest to it with which I've had significant experience this year, which is not to say that the Leica is bad. It's not. It's really about how good the Sony is. Now, does this make the Sony better than, say, a Canon 100 to 400? I can't say that it does because I haven't used one, but that doesn't stop me from telling you that if you're operating in the Sony E-mount world, this is just a killer option to have in your kit, even at $2,500 a pop. Then there's the winner of my 2017 full-frame lens I wanted to go hands-on with but didn't, which is the Zeiss Batis 135mm f2.8. I already know and respect the Batis line well, but what makes this lens particularly interesting to me is that literally, for decades, my favorite portrait lens was actually a 135mm Canon. I prefer that field of view to the 85 or 90, which is probably one of the reasons I'm so high on the Olympus 75mm f1.8 on the GH5. Well, maybe I'll get a chance to use that in 2018. The last category of 2017 lens winners is for dedicated APS-C crop sensor coverage, and this is very interesting. It's interesting to me, at any rate, for three reasons. One, for who won. Two, for who didn't. And three, why. Fuji dominated this category with 4 wins across 5 lenses. Sigma came in at number 2 with 2 wins, Sony came in with a single win, and not a peep from Canon, Nikon, or Sony otherwise. To which one can only respond, of course. All 3 manufacturers are focused on the more expensive, higher margin full-frame glass, content to offer, for the most part, notably optically inferior, mechanically inferior, consumer-grade crop sensor zooms. To which I can only reply, 'tis a pity, but thank you for enabling Fuji and Sigma, because competition is a good thing. So let's line them up. First, the company who swept my 2017 APS-C Lens of the Year winners in wide angle, well, tied in this case, moderate telephoto, telephoto zoom, and cine zoom lenses. Fujifilm, you rock. In your native X-mount, you tied for APS-C wide-angle lens of the year with your 900mm, 16mm f1.4. One APS-C moderate telephoto of the year with your $900 56mm f1.2. And one APS-C telephoto zoom of the year with your $2,200 $100 to $400 f4.5 to 5.6 with 1.4x teleconverter. These were all in X-mount. And one APS-C Cine Manual Focus Zoom Lens Family of the Year for the pair of your 7800 Sony E-mount MK 18 to 55 and 50 to 135 T 2.9 geared Cine lenses. What all of these lenses share is outstanding image quality, excellent build quality, relatively light and compact dimensions, silky smooth operation, and what I consider to be, in this day and age, reasonable pricing. Before this year, Fuji just wasn't that interesting to me, but now I find them fascinating. I do wish, though, that the 18 to 55 was actually a 16 to 55. Second, the company who tied Fuji in the APS-C wide-angle category and won outright the APS-C autofocus zoom lens family of the year, with variants for Canon, Nikon, and Sony, native for one of the lenses via the adapter in the other, and that's Sigma. It is no newsflash that Sigma has helped redefine what it means to be a third-party lens manufacturer, but you can argue they've now become a leader. I certainly would. Sigma's keenly priced crop sensor, only $450 16mm f1.4 in native Sony E-mount, promises to be a compact, lightweight, killer image quality lens, just like the 30mm 1.4 I already own in native Micro Four Thirds mount, with precisely the full-frame equivalent field of view 24mm that I love. They offer their well-known and highly regarded $700 18-35 and $1,000 50-100 1/8 in native Canon and Nikon mount, though the Canon is superior in my book because it transmits EXIF data and maintains some level of autofocus control, and the identically priced 18-35 1.8 in native Sony E-mount, the 50-100 is not, but can be coupled to a Sony body via the $150 MC11 adapter. These two lenses have become the de facto standard for video shooters, insisting on speed unavailable from anyone else, with outstanding image quality at affordable prices, even if they are designed as photography lenses. The trade-offs are that they are big, monstrously heavy beasts and suffer from focus breathing that the purpose-built Fuji MK twins do not. And again, I wish the 18 were down at 16. Finally, the only entry in the APS-C category from what I guess I'll now call the majors, Canon, Nikon, and again, now Sony, is Sony's new 18-110 f4. This is a purpose-built, whopping $3,400 native E-mount crop sensor video lens that has native autofocus capabilities, power zoom, which I actually don't really care about, hybrid ergonomics, which include rubberized and geared rings for zoom, aperture, and focus, which are beautifully weighted and can be pulled by hand in a crunch, and little to no focus breathing or focus shift, though this last one relies on autofocus capabilities to make that possible. While it gives up a stop of light, some image quality, not much, but it's visible to the practiced eye, and ultimate focus control to the Fuji MK twins, the Sony offers almost the same focal range in one lens at just about half the price of the pair, and this makes it a relative bargain. Though, on the flip side, it's twice the price of the Sigma pair, and heavy. It is wonderful to have choices. It's getting late. You can see I'm bobbling words. I'm getting tired. So let's power through these last few categories quickly. Sound. My 2017 winner for Best Wireless Lav System, so critical to what I do, not only on YouTube, but when shooting our documentary work, is, and this is the first time I've ever had one, but as I said, this is only the second year I'm doing it, a three-way tie. Most budget-friendly of the three has to go to the Rodelink Filmmaker. At $400 with really no setup at all, the sound quality is excellent. Ergos are excellent because there's nothing to do. The absence of an external wire antenna is one less thing to get hung up on when you're pulling it from your bag. And price and service are pretty unbeatable. The one qualm I'd had with them for a while was that sometimes I'd get noise from what I eventually learned was a bad mic connection. But with this said, Rode has redesigned the mic cable since I first bought them. And when I reached out to them 2 years later after I found this out, Rode immediately replaced both of them free of charge. So now I'm completely comfortable relying on them again. The downsides are limited to the fact that they are relatively big and require unmounting the receiver from the camera or transmitter from the talent to change the pair of AA batteries inside. Next, most unique is the Sennheiser AVX system. At $700 a pop for the basic and absolutely outstanding ME2 mic, the kit is obviously much more expensive than the Rode, but I can see the value. The receiver is not much larger than an XLR connector and a thumb. It sets up with much less fuss than the Sennheiser EW100G2 setup I sold off to buy the Rodes. It has some kind of built-in, can't turn it off limiter that operates more intelligently than the usual limiter in auto gain. And with the fact that it uses custom rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, it is the smallest of the three kits. It's well built, has a small, relatively drag-free antenna mast rather than wire antenna, and is basically the perfect complement for a two-mic setup when using something like the Panasonic XLR mic adapter. Not essentially, it just is. The only downside, other than price, is that I think the you can't shut it off intelligent limiter can be fooled into unintended artifacts. I experienced this precisely once when I sat too close to a hard surface directly in front of me, resulting in a surprisingly hollow sound, like what happens when you enable voice enhance or noise reduction in Final Cut Pro 10 and the audio sounds a bit like you're inside a fishbowl. I'll have to play with this a bit more, but other than that, the AVX has been outstanding. Full review to follow. Finally, Sony's UWP D11 at $600 a pop has been my vlogging go-to for at least a year. while I let my Rode links rest. The Sony worked 100% of the time, always providing excellent sound. Like the Rode and the AVX, it's much less fiddly than the older Sennheiser EW100G2. Like the AVX, it's small and well built, but has the added advantage over both of the other systems of using slide-out battery trays, which allow you to keep receiver and transmitter in place while you change the pair of AA batteries. This is a big deal in the heat of a shoot. If you often use a 2-mic setup, Sony offers a 2-channel receiver with built-in mixer and input for a third mic, all in a package not much bigger than the single receiver of the UWP-D11 for $700. Now, I haven't used it myself, but this makes it the smallest of the group in a 2-mic setup and has the additional benefit for Sony shooters of being compatible with the multi-interface shoe, meaning you don't need a wire. But the issue here is, at least with the UWP on an A6300, that it switches to auto gain, which you do not want. So forget about that. Use the output cable to connect the receiver to the camera instead. No biggie. And you're looking at a $1,900 well spent in my book. This ends up being within $150 of a pair of AVXs feeding the PAN-80 mic adapter. But both of these systems are significantly more expensive than a pair of Rodes, even with the adapter, which will sound just about as good to my ear, though they will take up much more space and be a little more operationally challenging when it comes to changing the batteries. Bottom line, you can't go wrong with any of them. Next, my 2000 Lighting Kit of the Year award goes to Aperture's $720 Lightstorm Mini 20 LED Flight Kit. This 3-pack is not high-powered, but it is so small and so flexible. 3 separate dimmable single-point heads, 1 bicolor, 2 daylight, that can be powered by battery, come with barn doors, stands, and swivel heads, that it has allowed me to light shots in a way I never have before. They have the usual Aperture characteristics of smart design, high color fidelity, consistent controls, good value, and robustness, though in this case they are not remote controllable and are definitely less robust than the larger COB 120s, Lightstorm LS1s, and LS1 halves. Which is okay by me because they're also much lighter and I generally don't use the remote when doing, say, interviews, although I do occasionally use a remote here in the Batcave using one of the larger Lightstorms. Even the stands are interesting because they seem designed specifically for these lights, a smart set of trade-offs to create small, transport-friendly, yet suitably sturdy mounting points for everything from a 3-point interview setup to really lovely individual light product shots. At the moment, the only downside is that I think I'd like all 3 to be bicolor, though I understand this reduces total light output. I'll be bringing you a more detailed review in the coming days. Next, supports. I've got another tie, this time for Tripod of the Year. I was already a Cartoni owner, but when Cartoni came out with the 75mm bowl carbon fiber SDS8, I got excited all over again, as you'll have seen in my review. This is, as you've seen in my review, the fastest setup and takedown tripod I've ever used. And unlike the not comparable Mi Photo Globe Trekker that I like so much because of how small it folds up, or even my slightly larger but much more robust carbon fiber Gitzo Mountaineer, the Cartoni is a dramatically more solid and robust platform, easily allowing me to mount a slider atop it or serve as the support for astrophotography or increasingly in vogue pixel shifting. But with this said, Sockler came out with the Flowtech FSB6 just around the same time, and for the last few weeks I've been working with both of them. They are more similar than different, from load limits, kind of 18 pounds or so at the head, precision, fit, finish, industrial design, different but of similar quality, to the weight of the kits themselves, price about $2,100 each, materials selection, common quick release plates, essentially identical foot design, and the same raison d'etre, rapid setup and takedown. Neither one has a lighted bubble level, though the level in both is very legible where there's enough light. Good things most smartphones now have built-in flashlights, though honestly that's a pain unless someone else is holding it. Both of these tripods are at a completely different level than, say, any of the Manfrottos I've ever used. On the other hand, there are some notable differences. Both eliminate all but one locking lever per leg, but the Sockler keeps the lever at the top of the top stage rather than floating along that top stage as you extend the legs the way it does on the Cartoni. The Sockler uses presets in its fluid head, while the Cartoni is continuously variable. The Sockler uses magnets, very clever, to hold the tripod legs together when moving it, and uses uniquely formed stages within stages for the legs, where the Cartoni uses rubber straps, and more traditional yet very stiff carbon fiber dual tube design for 2 of the 3 stages. The Sockler sits a bit higher when you first open it because the mid-level spreader has a smaller radius, but the Cartoni's SDS spreader allows it to go lower and is much faster to adjust. In the end, they are both wonderfully fast, robust, smooth, and a pleasure to use, though at the margins, I prefer the Cartoni spreader and the Sockler magnets. Each one of them is a solid long-term investment that will serve you well for video, and either one offers you one less thing to worry about in the heat of a shoot. Fuller review coming yet again. Almost done. This feels like a really cheap Academy Awards. Way too long, with none of the glitz, glamour, humor, or music. 2017 Drone of the Year award goes to DJI's Mavic Pro because it's small, fast, works with DJI's goggles and Crystal Sky high brightness monitors, has all of the intelligent flight modes, is keenly priced relative to the Phantom 4, is now quieter, still has great image quality, and doesn't waste time with consumer hand gestures like the whatever it is. I'd stick with the original $1,130 Fly More combo because you want the extra batteries and controller, but if you're like me, you don't really care about 4 decibels less noise nor an extra 3 minutes of flight time. Put the savings toward a Crystal Sky monitor. End of story. 3 more categories to go, and then the big one. Winner of my 2017 mass storage device goes to G-Speed's Shuttle XL Thunderbolt 2, not 3. Hold that thought. I have an 8-bay, 24-terabyte monster, which is quiet, unobtrusive, and at RAID 5 gives me around 800 megabyte per second write and 1100 megabyte per second read. I tested it against the promised Pegasus 2R6, which was equally quiet and well built and even included the same software with a different logo, though with 6 bays the Pegasus offered slower write speeds, yet a touch faster read speeds, both around 820 megabytes per second. The reason why I suggest the Thunderbolt 2, is because it is or was selling for almost $1,000 less than the Thunderbolt 3 version, and the speed I have with the Thunderbolt 2 is sufficient for my 4K video editing needs. Winner of 2017 Monitor or Recorder of the Year is the Atomos Ninja Inferno, or maybe it's the Flame. We love the latest version of the Ninja, the 1500 nit 4K 60p recording HDMI only Inferno. The interface is stellar, the assist's beautiful, the colors and brightness excellent, all packaged at an aggressive $995, down $300 from its predecessor, the Ninja's original launch price. The downside is that it's big, heavy, and even with 2 batteries, doesn't really last any longer than the single battery, less bright Assassin. On the other hand, as I'm recording this, the same except for no 60 frames per second, Flame is selling for a crazy low $595. I don't know how long that will last, but this is a definite bargain. Honorable mention has to go to the small HD focus. I have it in-house, but haven't had time to ring it out yet, but on the basis of number of check boxes it ticks off for a hybrid shooter, to what I've been experimenting with and now think may just be the best interface out there in a monitor, I bet I'm going to really, really like it, especially Sony shooters will like it who don't have flippy screens. I'd opt for the more expensive, $100 more expensive $599 bundle, which comes with clever mounting bracket and adapter, allowing the camera to run off the Focus's bigger Sony-style battery. More coming on this one too. 3 categories to go. Winner of 2017's lenses I already knew about but have to spend more time with goes to the Voigtlander Noktons from Micro Four Thirds. Look, I almost bought a GH4 a few years ago just because of these 0.95 manual focus lenses, but pragmatism led me in another direction. In 2018, I'm looking at spending more time with them because there's something exceptional about a fast, manual focus lens with hard stops, especially on a camera as good as the GH5 or the G9. One more category, and then we've got the big one, our second ever annual Elephant Award. Call this category winner the 2017 Adobe is Dead to Me Award. Editing software for stills is yet another tie, but what they share in common is a path out of Lightroom, something upon which I now insist. I just don't like Adobe's business model or the way it treats its customers, ramming a subscription model down our collective throats that we don't need, and being sneaky about it at that. At the high end, I've gotten Capture One Pro Religion. Shouts out to Bud's Chris Gambit of The Faux Bloggrapher and Kevin Raber of Luminous Landscape for showing me the light. Ha ha, get it? Yes, pun intended. This thing is just unbelievably powerful, and once you master it, incredibly fast. Really, I'm not a religious guy, but Capture One Pro was a revelation. I'm beginning to annoy myself. And at $300, I think fairly priced. I'll be saying more about this in the future. At the low end, which really isn't so low at all when you think about it, imagine Capture One meets Instagram, is Skylum's Luminar 2018 on sale right now for $69, unless you can find a discount code. And last time I looked, Canon Rumors and Sony Alpha Rumors had one to give you an extra $10 off. I understand that Capture One takes time to learn. I'm still learning it and will be for a while, I think. And I get that Luminar doesn't have the catalog capabilities yet that Lightroom does. I'm still learning that too. But with this said, both products prove conclusively that there are other, better, less expensive ways to skin the photo editing cat than Lightroom or Photoshop. Okay, that's just a strange thing to say. Anyway, when it comes to Adobe, I am so out of there. Finally, I'm delighted to announce our second annual Elephant Award. Now, this award goes to the year's best example through image making of the three blind men and an elephant ethos of truly understanding what we see by taking multiple perspectives on that which we seek to know. It's not about the gear, usually not even about the image, but about the people who used and made them, respectively. Thus, last year's Elephant Award went to the civilian journalists and drone operators of Standing Rock, North Dakota, who gave us a dramatically fuller view of the conflict between Native American water protectors and their supporters on the one hand, and government, law enforcement, and private enterprise on the other. It was a startling and conclusive, who are you going to believe, us or your lying eyes moment, and shaped my documentary work in 2017. This year's winner is, and I knew it would be the moment I first began watching it unfold on social media, the 500,000 men, women, and children of the Women's March on Washington, D.C. Remember this? Somewhere between 450 and 500,000 people of all races, age, genders, colors, sexual preference, national origin, religion, you name the label, they were there, came to the nation's capital on January 21st to tell the new administration that women's rights are human rights, and then told politicians a whole bunch more. It took on an extraordinary momentum, spreading across the U.S. and beyond, with millions of people joining across hundreds of marches worldwide. There are two things about this year's winners, ultimately, we, the people, that stood out to me and made them the obvious choice as soon as I saw it. First, they showed up. And I've said so many times before, yes, it's about the gear. No, it's not about the gear. It's about the people. You just can't overstate how important it is just to show up. But two, it was about the gear. Thousands of people streamed the events on the street live from their smartphones to Twitter and Facebook, wrestling narrative control from the few to the many with a level of immediacy, authenticity, and scale I've never seen before. It was magnificent. One person's truth may not be another's subjective truth, but cutting out the middleman to get to the actual truth, or at least one's own truth, is incredible. Which has to make you wonder what, precisely, is the intended outcome of the FCC's plan to repeal net neutrality. Are you exhausted yet? I am. Thanks for staying with me to the end. And that is that. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation below, share, add to a playlist, and especially this time of year, consider supporting our work by using our no-cost-to-you affiliate links, or even making that contribution directly via the PayPal link below. We really do thank you for it. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone. See you next time.